In 2012, Hollywood legend Clint Eastwood received a phone call that would change his life. On the other end of the line was a man who had just written a book about his time as the deadliest sniper in American military history. His name was Chris Kyle, and what Kyle would tell Eastwood in the months that followed would force the director to make a film unlike anything he had done before. But there was a problem. Before Eastwood could finish the movie, Chris Kyle was dead. This is the story of what really happened when two American legends crossed paths, and how a Navy SEAL changed the way Clint Eastwood saw war forever. To understand this story, you need to know who Chris Kyle really was. Born in Odessa, Texas in 1974, Kyle grew up the son of a Sunday school teacher and a deacon. His father bought him his first rifle when he was just 8 years old, a bolt-action Springfield that young Chris used to hunt deer and pheasant across the Texas plains. Kyle wasn't your typical soldier. Before joining the Navy, he worked as a ranch hand and a rodeo cowboy. He was 24 years old when he finally enlisted, older than most recruits. But what he lacked in youth, he made up for in talent. Kyle would go on to serve 4 tours in Iraq. During those tours, he recorded 160 officially confirmed kills, though Kyle himself claimed the real number was closer to 255. The Iraqi insurgents gave him a nickname, Al-Shaitan Ramadi, the Devil of Ramadi. They placed a $20,000 bounty on his head. His fellow Navy SEALs called him something else, the Legend. In 2012, after retiring from military service, Kyle published his autobiography, American Sniper, the autobiography of the most lethal sniper in US military history. The book became an instant bestseller, 2 million copies sold, and Hollywood came calling. At first, American Sniper wasn't Clint Eastwood's project. In September 2012, director David O. Russell expressed interest in making the film. Bradley Cooper, who had just read Kyle's book, was passionate about playing the role. He even suggested Chris Pratt for the part, but Warner Brothers told him they'd only buy the rights if Cooper himself would star. Then, in early 2013, Steven Spielberg signed on to direct. Spielberg had his own vision for the film. He wanted to create a psychological warfare story, with an enemy sniper hunting Kyle throughout Iraq, like a deadly game of cat and mouse. But Spielberg's vision required a massive budget. The screenplay grew to over 160 pages. Warner Brothers couldn't afford it. On August 5th, 2013, Spielberg walked away from the project. 16 days later, on August 21st, Clint Eastwood stepped in. The 83-year-old director had a reputation for working fast, working cheap, and getting to the truth. He didn't need 160 pages or a $100 million budget. He just needed to tell Chris Kyle's story the right way. But there was one problem. On February 2nd, 2013, just one day after screenwriter Jason Hall had turned in his first draft, Chris Kyle was murdered, shot and killed at a Texas gun range by a fellow veteran he was trying to help. Kyle never lived to see his movie made, but the men who served with him, they made sure his story was told right. When Clint Eastwood took over American Sniper, he knew he needed something Hollywood couldn't fake, authenticity. So he brought in the real men who had fought alongside Chris Kyle in Iraq. The most important of these men was Navy SEAL Kevin Dauber Lax. Lax had served 2 combat deployments to Iraq with Kyle. They were brothers in arms. When Kyle died, it was Lax who stood at his memorial service and pinned his SEAL trident onto Kyle's casket, a final tribute to a fallen warrior. Now, Lax was going to make sure Hollywood got it right. "I'm going to tell you how this works," Lax told the cast and crew on his first day. "Clint shot bad guys in movies. I shot bad guys in real life. Let's go ahead and make a realistic movie." Lax worked with Bradley Cooper every single day on set. He taught Cooper how to hold a rifle, how to move like a SEAL, how to think like a sniper. "I was on him like stink on shit," Lax later recalled. "Every combat scene, every SEAL moment, I was right there." But Lax didn't just advise from the sidelines. One day during filming, Cooper pulled Lace aside. "Hey man," Cooper said, "did you ever think about playing yourself in the movie?" Laz was speechless. For the first time in his life, the combat veteran had no answer. "I never thought about that," Lax finally said, "but go ahead and shoot that target and we'll talk later." That night at dinner, Cooper made his pitch to Clint Eastwood. Kevin Lakes needed to be in this movie. Eastwood agreed immediately. Lakes sent an audition tape filmed on an iPhone with help from screenwriter Jason Hall. A few days later, he got the call. He was cast in American Sniper as himself. "It was surreal," Leachy said. "I loved it. Watching Bradley work so hard to become Chris Kyle, you could see it. The attention to detail, the accuracy, it does justice to the SEAL teams. It's a raw, gritty, visceral depiction of what modern war really is." Through Kevin Laz and the other advisors, Clint Eastwood learned something that would change how he made the film. War isn't glorious. One day during filming, it was raining. Eastwood pulled Laz aside. The director was wearing his signature boonie hat and camouflage jacket, looking every bit like the cowboys he used to play in westerns. "How would Chris have shot a guy in a vehicle?" Eastwood asked. Laz thought about it for a second. "Well, Mr. Eastwood," he said, "if he shoots him fast, he shoots like a Navy SEAL. But if he shoots him slow, Latz paused. He shoots like someone who's thinking about it, someone who's carrying the weight. Eastwood nodded slowly. He understood. This wasn't a movie about heroism, it was a movie about cost. Chris Kyle didn't come home a hero, he came home broken. He had PTSD, nightmares, episodes of road rage, reconstructive surgery on both knees, high blood pressure, hearing loss, insomnia. His wife Taya later recalled that the man who came back from Iraq wasn't the same man who left. Do you ever think you might have seen things or done some things over there that you wish you hadn't? A VA psychiatrist asked Kyle in the movie. Kyle's answer is haunting. The thing that haunts me are all the guys I couldn't save. That line, that truth, came directly from the real Chris Kyle. And it came from the men like Kevin Latz, who lived through the same hell and carried the same ghost home with them. Clint Eastwood later said, "This film shows what war does to the people left behind, presenting the fact of what war does to the family and the people who have to go back into civilian life. That is the biggest anti-war statement any film can make." It was a message Chris Kyle himself would have agreed with, but Kyle never got to see the movie, and Eastwood had to decide, how do you end a film about a man who was murdered before he could see his own story on screen? On February 2nd, 2013, Chris Kyle drove to a Texas gun range with his friend Chad Littlefield and a troubled young Marine veteran named Eddie Ray Ruth. Kyle was trying to help Ruth deal with PTSD, the same condition Kyle himself struggled with every day. At the range, Ruth turned on Kyle and Littlefield. He shot them both multiple times with the very guns Kyle had brought for them to shoot. Chris Kyle was 38 years old. When screenwriter Jason Hall heard the news, he was devastated. He had just turned in his first draft of American Sniper the day before. 5 days after Kyle's murder, his widow Taya called Jason Hall. "If you guys are going to do this," she told him, "you're going to need to get it right. This is going to play a part, for better or worse, in how my kids remember their dad." Hall and Eastwood wrestled with the question, should they show Chris Kyle's death in the film? "I wrote it 5 different ways," Hall later said. "We talked about how we would shoot it, but in the end, they decided not to. I didn't want this movie hanging over Taya's kids' heads for the rest of their lives," Hall explained, "and I didn't want to glorify the man who killed him. Instead, the film ends with Kyle kissing his wife and children goodbye and driving away to the gun range. The screen fades to black. A title card explains what happened next. Then, the film shows something else. Real footage from Chris Kyle's memorial service. Thousands of people lined the highways of Texas as his funeral procession passed. American flags waved, veterans saluted. It was one of the largest memorial services in Texas history. Kevin Latz was there. He pinned his steel trident onto Kyle's coffin. Clint does it so brilliantly that you don't even realize it's happening," Hall said. "For Taya, this is how it happened. In a moment where it was just another day, and then he was gone." The film became the highest grossing war movie of all time. It made over $547 million worldwide. It was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Bradley Cooper was nominated for Best Actor. And Clint Eastwood, at age 84, proved once again that he was one of the greatest directors in Hollywood history. But more importantly, the film honored Chris Kyle's memory the way his widow wanted, by showing the truth of what he endured and what he sacrificed. On February 2nd, 2015, exactly 2 years after Chris Kyle's murder, Texas Governor Greg Abbott declared the day Chris Kyle Day. A memorial was built in Kyle's hometown of Odessa, Texas. It includes a plaza and a bronze statue of the legendary sniper. The Taya and Chris Kyle Foundation continues to help military families to this day, carrying on Kyle's mission of supporting veterans struggling with the invisible wounds of war. Kevin Latz, the Navy SEAL who advised Clint Eastwood and played himself in the film, continues to speak about his time with Kyle and the importance of telling true stories about war. "Everyone on that set put in 100%, Latz said, and the product speaks volumes. Chris Kyle once said that if there was ever going to be a movie made about him, there was only one filmmaker he trusted to do it right, Clint Eastwood, and no one else." Kyle never lived to see his wish come true, but Eastwood and the real warriors who served with Kyle made sure the world remembered him not as a Hollywood hero, but as a real man who carried a real burden, a husband, a father, a warrior, and a legend. They don't make men like Chris Kyle anymore, and they don't make films like American Sniper anymore. Films that show the truth instead of the fantasy. Clint Eastwood understood that, because Eastwood himself was cut from the same cloth as the men he honored on screen. This is Clint Eastwood's Forgotten Legends, where we uncover the real stories behind Hollywood's greatest icon. If you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe to this channel and hit the bell so you never miss a legend. Next time, we'll tell you about the stuntman who nearly died on Clint Eastwood's set, and what the director did next that saved Hollywood itself. Until then, remember, honor, courage, and truth. That's what the real men stand for. It's what